Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be taking a look at patch 1.1.1 and more specifically how it feels now that it's actually live in the game. Now this is being recorded one day after it was released, and this will probably be uploaded 2 days after, but it came out on the 8th. So I went ahead and spent an entire day diving into as much stuff as possible, testing a bunch of stuff, and now I want to make the video talking about how it actually feels. Now, during the testing, I actually discovered there are a lot of things they changed that weren't actually in the patch notes, specifically with the Barber heart. Now, we're going to talk about that later at the end of the video, but first let's dive into some mob density and let's see how that actually feels in the game. All right, so if you are not aware, mob density has officially been changed in Diablo 4, and now this was changed in 2 places. The first being in dungeons, where we saw about a 50% increase in the total amount of mobs in the area. Now, there was a second place that mob density was also changed, and that is in Helltide. Now, Helltides to me have a huge difference. I don't know the exact numbers, it's very hard to calculate the total percentage, but I'm guessing it's probably similar to dungeons, if not a little bit more. So maybe in that 50% increase range. Now, Helltides are a blast to play now. You don't have to go running from mob to mob trying to find an event. Now you can just completely slay an entire area and you'll get plenty of the embers you need to open up the chest. Helltides are a blast and I highly encourage you to check them out now, as they have been more fun than they ever are. Next, let's dive into the big one, which is dungeons. Now, as you can see in the picture here, we have before this was actually released during the Campfire Chat, talking about the mob density. And from the picture, it's pretty clear that there's going to be a lot more mobs in these, and while playing through them, there are, and it makes a huge difference in how the dungeons feel to play. Overall, these dungeons are fun again finally. You know, for a long time, nightmare dungeons have seemed kind of boring. They haven't been super fun to play, and overall it's just been kind of an iffy experience, especially when you consider that nightmare dungeons are over 70% of the gameplay we have to do. So with this, I am super glad, and with the increase to the mob density, we also get increased experience. So this was a 2-for-1, making it easier to level up and more enjoyable. Now, one thing to keep in mind is with the mob density, you might be finding it harder to do the same tier of nightmare dungeons as you were doing before patch. And no, your build has not gotten weaker. It's just there are so many enemies now, it can be very easy to get overwhelmed and completely destroyed. So be careful out there. You might have to drop down a few tiers, but overall the XP gains are very, very nice. I've estimated about a 20 to 30% increase in XP gains per hour just from the mob density update. Now, with this mob density update, there's also some other stuff going on. So with this, actually pre-season this was a thing, people would do what are called no boss runs in nightmare dungeons. They'd get a nightmare dungeon with really good modifiers, and they would run through the dungeon until they were completed all the objectives and killed everything, and then they would reset the dungeon before killing the boss. When they buffed nightmare dungeons originally and increased the experience gain at the end, this was no longer worth it. It was better just to clear the dungeon, you'd get more experience. But with the mob changes and how much XP we're getting just from killing mobs now, people are starting to strategize that it's actually probably going to be faster to be just resetting dungeons and running one over and over again. Now, my personal thoughts on this, if that's what you want to do, I think that's a perfectly fine. It's not an exploit, it's not a glitch, it's just killing the same mobs over and over again. Now, me personally, I'm not going to be doing this. I don't find that fun or rewarding in any way. To me, it's better just to farm, different nightmare dungeons. We farm a lot of nightmare dungeons to get to level 100 and to get the gear, and to do the same one over and over again all day, that's just not my kind of play style. It's just not how I like to play. But if you want to do it, there's nothing wrong with that, and that will be maximizing the amount of XP you get per hour if you don't have long to play. Now, me personally, I'm just going to keep grinding through, as many nightmare dungeons as I can, about 10 levels higher than me. As one thing I've seen going around the community is people think that the higher nightmare level dungeon you can do, the better, and that's not true for experience. See, in this game, experience is gated since season 1, basically meaning that if the monsters are above 10 levels higher than you in World Tier 4, you're not going to be getting that bonus XP buff per kill. And what this means is not only are they harder to kill, but you're sometimes losing experience between the time it takes to kill them and you're no longer getting the XP buff. You got to be careful in running nightmare dungeons, because if you push too hard and go too high, you're going to be losing out on that XP. While the base XP will go up per level, the bonus is what you're losing out on, and that bonus can be quite a substantial amount of XP. So just keep that in mind. I would recommend farming about 10 levels higher than you. Pretty much every build in the game should be able to run through them no problem. And you know, if you really want to challenge yourself, there's nothing wrong with going higher than that, but that's what I would recommend for the most amount of XP possible. Next, let's talk about the obvious changes, which are buffs to Barbarian and Sorcerer. Now with these buffs, both classes are far more prevalent and much easier to play in the end game. Now all of the classes actually received buffs, and especially Necromancer, which is what I main, received a bunch of really nice buffs. And I've actually made a build that absolutely destroys this patch. It just got a huge buff, so go check it out in the time card above or in the description down below. Now with this, we had a absolute ton of bug fixes, from everything to quests to dungeons to everything, from whether it was properties not interacting with each other right on armor and gear sets to everything. They have done a very good job fixing all of that. Now again, we do have news. If you haven't heard, we have another stash tab finally. Now this is super helpful, as I was completely full just trying to play one character and it was an absolute mess. I am very glad to have one more stash tab. Hopefully there are more to come in the future. And next, hopefully maybe an inventory buff, because we all know that can be pretty hard to deal with. Now let's get into the final topic of this video, which is the season of the Barber. Yes, you've heard that right. I have renamed the season to what it's more accurately is now. The Barber has received extensive buffs. Yes, you heard that right, buffs with this patch. And the reason is the Barber heart was already incredibly strong before this patch, outshining all the other Wrathful hearts, and they made it even better. And they did it in a way that they didn't actually talk about in the Campfire Chat or in the patch notes. So what happened is Lucky Hit and a number of other skills in the game were not working with the Barber heart the way they were intended. And this was causing actually a DPS loss when there should have been damage there. Specifically, characters like the Rogue and the Necromancer were getting hit especially hard with their Lucky Hit chances. Now with this, in patch 1.1.1, they have fixed almost every single problem with the Barber heart. Not only are you not sucking away your teammates' damage anymore, but you are actually getting the damage you're supposed to be. And with this buff, people are seeing absolute insane DPS increases from the Barber heart. As it stands right now, the Barber heart is by far the best Wrathful heart to use. I mean, miles and miles above everything else. It completely takes a build from mediocre to clearing any content in the game, including Uber Lilith. It is absolutely season of the Barber now, and I think it's going to stay that way until the entire season. I don't see them destroying the Barber at this point. So many people love it and have built their builds around it. They're not going to nerf it this late in the season. Now, this is something to keep in mind for future seasons, as I don't think they'll try and have this happen again, as I don't think they intended the Barber to be quite this strong. Now, I am really happy with this change. I use the Barber. I know not everyone in the community enjoys it, and I'm in that camp where it's 50-50 for me. I like the premise of being able to store up damage to do these huge crits. That's really fun, but only having one viable Wrathful heart is kind of boring. Now, what I would like to see them do is actually buff the other Wrathful hearts to bring them to a level where they compete with the Barber. Like, for instance, the build I created utilizes shadow damage over time to continually proc the shadow damage ultimate passive. And this is incredibly strong with the Barber, as it continues to crit and crit on itself until it finally explodes in a huge explosion of crit damage. Now, there is a Wrathful heart that is specifically for damage over time and increasing that damage, and I think it could absolutely be amazing with my build, but the problem is that after testing it, you lose millions of damage for not using the Barber. The bonuses you get for using the Wrathful heart made for the build are absolutely minuscule compared to what the Barber does. And I would just like to see them bring up those other Wrathful hearts to give some more build variety, because really nowadays all the build guides are, you know, use whatever build you want, just make sure you have the Barber and you'll kill everything. Now, a quick side note about the Barber is there have been some confusion in the community. With the Barber, you want a 4-second timer on the Barber only for bosses. Now, there's been people saying, you know, oh, what's the best for what? And ideally, they have different purposes. It can roll between 2 seconds of stored damage and 4 seconds of stored damage. Now, the higher the stored damage, the higher it can climb, obviously, and it multiplies on each other, but it can be kind of annoying to clear ads with a 4-second Barber. So what I would recommend is maybe getting a mid-roll. You know, they are kind of rare, so obviously if you only have one slot, what you have, it's going to be better than still anything else. The 2-second is by far the best for clearing ads, and the 4-second absolutely melts bosses. But in the end of the day, they're both incredibly strong. Now, overall, if I recommend, if you have 2 of them, I would recommend slotting the higher one, the one that has the most time, the closer to 4-second one. And the reason is one new change that they fixed with the Barber, which was supposed to be working beforehand, now it just works better, is when you are damaging a low health enemy, like, you know, a group of ads, and you actually get to the point where the ad will die with the Barber's stored damage, instead of waiting for the cooldown to come off and explode, it will explode immediately, making it much more convenient to run around. You don't sit there doing no damage for 10 seconds. And I am super glad with this change. It makes Nightmare Dungeons a lot more enjoyable. Now that is going to wrap it up of our patch 1.1.1 thoughts and feelings. Thank you everybody for watching. If you made it this far in the video, please help me out on here on YouTube and hit that like and subscribe button. And I hope to see you guys in a future video. Peace out. Have a good one.